Welcome to the Y Solutions Hazard Communication HAZCOM Safety Training. My name is Billy Campbell. I'm the Director of Safety. Here's your training. Terminal objective. Given current OSHA and general industry information regarding worksite illnesses, injuries, and/or fatalities, the student will be able to recognize responsibilities related to hazard communications, including global harmonized system requirements, enabling objectives. Identify the employer's responsibilities under the Hazard Communications Standard, including training requirements. Identify components of hazard communication program. Describe requirements of the different types of hazard communication labels. Locate pertinent information about chemicals on labels, including other forms of hazard communication, to ensure right to understand provisions of global harmonized system requirements. 7 major elements to hazard communication in global harmonized system include SDS, labels, signal words, hazard statements, precautionary statements, pictograms, training. In accordance with 29 CFR 1910-1200, employer responsibilities, employers shall ensure that labels on incoming containers of hazardous chemicals are not removed or defaced. Maintain copies of SDS received with incoming shipments. Obtain SDS as soon as possible for chemicals received without an SDS if employee requests the SDS. Ensure that SDS are readily accessible during each work shift to employees when they are in their work areas. Ensure that each container of hazardous chemicals in the workplace is labeled, tagged, or marked properly. Ensure that employees are provided information and training to the extent necessary to protect them in the event of a spill or leak of a hazardous chemical from a sealed container. In multi-employer workplaces, ensure that employees of other employers will have on-site access to SDSs for each hazardous chemical they may be exposed to while working, are informed of any precautionary measures needed to protect themselves under normal operating conditions or in foreseeable emergencies, and are informed of the labeling system used in the workplace. Develop, implement, and maintain a written hazard communication program. How hazard communications works. Manufacturer produces the chemical for the employer. When chemical is shipped to the employer, they need to have an SDS sheet attached. Employer then adds to their inventory, and per specifications on the SDS, make sure their employees are educated on the chemical and the potential hazards. Paragraph E of 29 CFR 1910-1200, Written Hazard Communication Program, requires employers to prepare and implement a written hazard communication program. This does not need to be lengthy or complicated. The main intent of the requirement is to help ensure that compliance with the standard is done in a systematic way and that all elements are coordinated. Thus, the program must describe how the employer will address the requirements of paragraph F, labels and other forms of warning, G, safety data sheets, and H, employee information and training in the workplace. Written program requirements, including lists of hazardous chemicals present, availability of safety data sheets to employees and downstream employers, labeling of containers of chemicals in the workplace, as well as of containers of chemicals being shipped to other workplaces, and development and implementation of employee training programs regarding hazards of chemicals and protective measures. List of hazardous chemicals known to be present in the workplace. Lists may be kept by product identifier from SDS, may be listed by product name, common name, or chemical name. Important: name used must be the same as the term used on SDS and label for cross-referencing. The hazardous communication system covers chemicals in all forms: liquids, solids, gases, vapors, fumes, and mists, whether they are contained or not. The nature of the chemical and the potential for exposure are the factors that determine whether a chemical is covered. Identify chemicals in containers, including pipes, but also think about chemicals that are generated during work operations. For example, welding fumes, dust, and exhaust fumes are all sources of chemical exposure. For use in other program elements as you survey workplace for hazardous chemicals, you may want to make note their locations and indicate hazards found on labels. Safety data sheet available and accessible to workers, required for all hazardous chemical used. Do not use hazardous chemicals if there is no SDS available. 16 section format. Written program should document designated persons responsible for obtaining and maintaining SDSs. That person at White Solution is the Director of Safety in coordination with supervisor, competent person, or site safety. How SDSs are maintained in workplace, notebooks in the work areas, or electronically. How workers obtain access to them when during the work shift. Procedures to follow when SDS is not received at time of the first shipment. SDS for each chemical in the workplace and training of workers that includes review of SDS format and use. Sections 1 through 8 contain general information about the chemical, identification, hazards, composition, safe handling practices, and emergency control measures. This information should be helpful to those that need to get the information quickly. Section 1, Identification, identifies the chemical on the SDS and its recommended uses, provides contact information of the supplier. Section 2, Hazards Identification, identifies the hazards of the chemical and appropriate warning information. Section 3, Composition Information on Ingredients, identifies ingredients contained in product, including impurities and stabilizing additives, including information on substances, mixtures, and all chemicals where a trade secret is claimed. Section 4, First Aid Measures, describes initial care that should be given by untrained responders to an individual who has been exposed to the chemical. Section 5, Firefighting Measures, provides recommendations for fighting a fire caused by the chemical. Section 6, Accidental Release Measures, provides recommendations on appropriate response to spills, leaks, or releases, including containment and cleanup to prevent or minimize exposure to people, properties, or the environment. Section 7, Handling and Storage, provides guidance on safe handling practices and conditions for safe storage of chemicals. Section 8, Exposure Controls Personnel Protection, indicates exposure limits, engineering controls, and PPE measures that can be used to minimize work exposure. Sections 9 through 11 and 16 contain other technical and scientific information, such as physical and chemical properties, stability and reactivity information, toxicological information, exposure control information, and other information including the date of preparation or last revision. Sections 12, 13, 14, and 15 are regulated by other agencies. Section 9, Physical and Chemical Properties, identifies physical and chemical properties associated with the substance or mixture. Section 10, Stability and Reactivity, describes reactivity hazards of chemicals and chemical stability information broken into 3 parts: reactivity, chemical stability, and other. Section 11, Toxicological Information, identifies toxicological and health effects information or indicates that such data is not available. Section 12, Ecological Information, provides information to evaluate the environmental impact of the chemicals if it were released into the environment. Section 13, Disposable Considerations, provides guidance on proper disposable practices, recycling, or reclamation of the chemicals or its container, and safe handling practices. Section 14, Transport Information, provides guidance on classification information for shipping and transporting of hazardous chemicals by road, air, rail, or sea. Section 15, Regulatory Information, identifies safety, health, and environmental regulations specific for the product that is not indicated anywhere else on SDS. Section 16, Other Information, indicates when SDS was prepared, revised, may state where changes have been made to previous versions, other useful information. The key for employees to be educated on the potential hazards of the chemicals they are working is to memorize the pictographs and what they mean. That gives a snapshot. Information about chemical hazards is to be conveyed in labels using quick visual notations to alert the user, providing immediate recognition of the hazards. Labels must also provide instructions on how to handle the chemicals so that chemical users are informed about how to protect themselves. The label provides information to the workers on the specific hazardous chemical. While labels provide important information for anyone who handles, uses, stores, and transports hazardous chemicals, they are limited by design in the amount of information they can provide. Safety data sheets, which must accompany hazardous chemicals, are the more complete resource for details regarding hazardous chemicals. Written hazard communication programs should document designated persons responsible for ensuring compliant labeling of shipped and in-plant containers, description of written alternatives to labeling of stationary process containers if used, appropriate labels on all workplace containers, including those received from a supplier, secondary containers, and stationary process containers, description and an explanation of labels on both shipped and workplace containers, including in the employee's training program, procedure to review and update workplace label information when necessary. Employers may choose to label workplace containers either with the same label required for shipped containers of the chemical or may instead use alternative labels, as long as those labels provide employees with general information about the hazards of the chemical and the employer provides training so that employees exposed to the chemical understand the specific hazards it presents. Why Solutions will stick to global harmonized system standards. For information and training to be effective, the workers in the training must comprehend the hazards in the workplace and ways to protect themselves. OSHA does not expect that workers will be able to recall and recite all data provided about each hazardous chemical in the workplace. What is most important is that workers understand that they are exposed to hazardous chemicals, know how to read labels and SDSs, and have a general understanding of what information is provided in these documents and how to access these tools. Workers must also be aware of the protective measures available in their workplace, how to use or implement these measures, and who they should contact if an issue arises. Training must address the following methods and observation used to determine presence or release of chemicals in the work area, such as monitoring conducted by employer continuous monitoring devices, visual appearance or odor of hazardous chemical when being released, hazards of chemicals in the work area, including physical hazards, health hazards, simple asphyxiation, combustible dust, pyrophoric acid, other hazards not otherwise classified. Measures employees can take to protect themselves from hazards, including specific procedures employer has implemented to protect employees from exposure to hazardous chemicals. Examples: appropriate work practices, emergency procedures, PPE to be used. Details of hazard communication program developed by employer. Explanation of labels received on ship containers and the workplace labeling system used by the employer. SDS including format where each type of information is located. How employees can obtain and use the appropriate hazard information. There are several types of labels that might be found on hazardous chemicals in a workplace, including Hazard Communication Standard, shipping labels, Hazard Communication Standard, workplace labels, National Fire Protection Association 704 labels, Hazardous Material Information Systems, Department of Transportation shipping labels, placarding, and marking. According to the Hazard Communication System, the term label is defined as an appropriate group of written, printed, or graphic information elements concerning a hazardous chemical that is affixed to, printed on, or attached to the immediate container of a hazardous chemical or to the outside packaging. To increase uniformity of labels, the Hazard Communication System requires the following information located together. Other information may also appear on the label: product identifier, signal word, hazard statement, precautionary statement, pictogram, name, address, telephone number of the responsible party, manufacturer, importer, or distributor. Those who know the most about the chemicals, the companies that produce, import, or distribute them, have the responsibility to assess available information and convey what is needed to downstream employers where the hazardous chemicals are used. The name, address, and telephone number of the responsible party must be included on the label. The product identifier is any chemical, common or trade name, or designation that the chemical manufacturer or importer chooses to use on the label. The term must also appear on the SDS. A signal word is a word used to indicate the relative level of severity of hazard and alert the reader to a potential hazard on the label. The signal words used in the standard are danger and warning. Danger is used for the more severe hazards, while warning is used for the less severe hazards. If there are multiple hazards, the word that indicates the highest severity level is used. A pictogram is a composition that may include a symbol plus other graphic elements such as border, background pattern, or color that is intended to convey specific information about the hazards of a chemical. 8 pictograms are designated under this standard for applications to a hazard category. Under HAZCOM 2012, pictograms are black symbols on a white background with red diamond border. Pictograms are an important addition to the hazard communication tools in the standard. A pictogram draws the attention of a label reader, and you and your workers should be aware that the appearance of a pictogram in a red diamond frame means that a hazard of concern is present in the product. Some of the pictograms in the standard have symbols that resemble the hazardous effect, and others are merely meant to attract attention. Pictograms may be used for several different hazardous effects as well. Pictograms include health hazards, carcinogen, flame, flammables, exclamation mark, irritant, skin and eye. Pictograms include gas cylinder, gases under pressure, corrosion, skin corrosion, burns, eye damage, corrosives to metals, exploding bomb, explosives, self-reactives, organic peroxides. Pictograms include flame over circle, oxidizers, environmental, non-mandatory, aquatic toxicity, skull and crossbones, acute toxicity, fatal or toxic. A hazard statement is a statement assigned to a hazard class and category that describes the nature of the hazards of a chemical, including, where appropriate, the degree of hazard. Example, fatal if swallowed. The hazard statements for a hazardous chemical describe the hazards in a text in a simple, direct manner. There is a hazard statement for each hazard category of a hazard class, and it will vary depending on the degree of hazard. The example, fatal if swallowed, is a hazard statement for acute or oral toxicity. The hazard statement conveys that the chemical is severely toxic and ingestion of the chemical results in death, but for less toxic chemicals, the hazard statement may be toxic if swallowed or harmful if swallowed. As with the signal word, this information conveys the relative severity of the hazard, which impacts how it's handled and controlled. A precautionary statement is a phrase that describes recommended measures that should be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to a hazardous chemical or improper storage of handling. Example, do not eat, drink, or smoke when using this product. Precautionary statements are key to helping you decide what you need to do to protect workers in your workplace. There are 4 types of statements: prevention, response, storage, and disposal. These have been assigned to the hazard classes and categories. For the workplace label, the container must be labeled, tagged, or marked with either the product identifier signal word, pictograms, hazard statements, and precautionary statements of the hazardous chemical, or product identifier and words, pictures, symbols, or a combination of these that provide at least general information about the hazards of the chemicals and which, in conjunction with the other information immediately available, provides employees with the specific information about the physical and health hazards of the hazardous chemical. The employer may use signs, play cards, process sheets, batch tickets, operating procedures, or other such written materials in lieu of affixing labels to individual stationary process containers, as long as the alternative method identifies the containers to which it it is applicable and conveys the information required by 29 CFR 1910-1200 outlined above to be on a label. The employer must ensure the written materials are readily accessible to the employees in their work area throughout each work shift. Alternative workplace labels. Permitted for workplace labels. Must provide at least general information regarding hazards of chemicals. Hazard warnings or pictograms that conflict with hazard communication system label elements cannot be used. Examples: NFPA 704 and Hazardous Material Information System. The NFPA diamond is typically located outside buildings, on doors, or on tanks and is intended to provide visible information about hazards to emergency responders during incidents such as a spill or fire. The square on point or diamond shape of the overall symbol identifies the hazards of the material and the severity of the hazards in an arrangement of smaller, color-coded diamonds representing the hazards, each of which has a numerical rating system representing the severity of the hazard. It is important to understand that the numbers used in the NFPA rating system are not relative ratings to the OSHA classification numbers and, in fact, are inverse. The NFPA rating system ranges from 0 to 4, with 0 being the least hazardous and 4 being the most hazardous, whereas OSHA's classification system ranges from 1 to 4, with 1 being the most severe hazard and 4 being the least severe hazard. NFPA label, just know the pattern and what it means. Red is flammable. Blue is for health. White is for special hazards. 1 to 4 is the number rating. The lower not such a risk, the higher the greater risk. Example: 2. Moderate health hazard. 4. Highly flammable. Flashpoint less than 73 degrees Fahrenheit. 0 equals normal stable. And W with a line through means that it doesn't play nice with water. The Hazardous Materials Information System was developed by the American Coatings Association to support in-plant labeling compliance with the Hazardous Communication Standard. The top space is used to identify the produce, and the 4 color-coded bars indicate different hazards. A rating scale of 0 to 4 indicates the severity of the hazards, with 0 being a minimal hazard and 4 being a severe hazard. Letter codes or icons indicate what personal protective equipment should be used. Blue bar indicates health hazards. 0 equals no significant risk. 1 equals possible irritation or minor injury. 2 equals temporary or minor injury may occur. 3 equals major injury likely without prompt action, medical treatment. 4 equals life-threatening, major, or permanent damage may result due to single exposure or repeated exposures. Note, there are 2 spaces in the health bar. The second space is used to signify chronic health hazards, which is indicated by the presence of an asterisk, and warns of health problems due to long-term exposure. Example: product is ammonium hydroxide. Health hazard, asterisk, equals chronic hazard. 2 equals moderate hazard that may cause temporary or minor injury. Flammability, minimal hazard, material will not burn. Physical hazard, minimal hazard, normally stable material. Personal protection, PPE needed includes splash goggles, gloves, apron, and dust vapor respirator. In this module, we discussed employers' responsibilities under Hazard Communication System, components of a hazard communication program, requirements of different types of hazard communication labels, how to locate pertinent information. This concludes training on hazard communications. Please proceed to take the exam.